Thank you. I'm not used to this.
It's not work right, it's not right.
Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, bienvenue, mes amis Québécois. Welcome, Vermonters, and town officials, and legislators. We have a lot of people here. Welcome, panelists. We have panelists from our little group we call Dump, and I'll explain that in a minute. First, my name is Henry Coe. I'm a resident, a long-time resident of the Northeast Kingdom, and I can remember in the late 60s, I used to dump my own trash, my worst trash, in the old dump in Coventry. It was known as the NEK-TV dump. I would bring kerosene and paint. I was part of the problem. I was poisoning a river. I think we all, at least if you're as old as I am, we all used to do that. Times have changed. Now we are situated with a mega landfill in our own backyard. And it's perched high, surrounded by wetlands. And the tributary to the Lake Newport is within, I believe, maybe a couple hundred yards of the edge of the landfill. And that goes into Lake Newport. And you Canadians know 185,000 Canadians in Sherbrooke, Magog, and everywhere else drink the water. It's your reservoir. And I attended the first public hearing where very few people, just a handful, I think maybe 10 local people attended. And I was startled because this was in the 9th inning and it was almost to be approved. And now there's a delay, fortunately, on the application for the permit of the landfill because further testing needs to be done on the chemistry, the leachate coming from the landfill. And further testing is now being done. So thank you for coming. I'll turn to my notes because I told you my little history. I also have sons and daughters here. I've got 7 grandchildren. I'm an old man, and those who are old in the audience know we think of our future generations and the great-grandchildren who soon follow. And that's why we're here. Excuse me. I also say, local people in Vermont really know there's something big going on here because 70 trucks a day at about 30 tons apiece carry garbage from all over Vermont to the Coventry landfill, a little town unzoned with 1,000 people. And they pound these roads. We hear them, we see them, we smell them. And not only do they come loaded, they go back empty. So that's 140 truckloads. And then, as well, leachate, garbage juice, flows south. And municipal water treatment plants are asked to treat this. They're not designed to treat chemical waste. Think about it. They were designed to treat domestic sewage. And now we're learning this whole new family of chemicals is infiltrating our water systems. Bennington had to replace 300 wells because of this family of chemicals, Teflon and stuff. Anything water resistant, Scotchgard. Think about it, all the clothing that's Scotchgarded and the sofas and the furniture. That's in those pits. We don't know what's in those pits. Our representative of this little group we call Dump, and Dump stands for Don't Undermine Newport-Magog's Purity. And we were just 8 people who met just 6 weeks ago. And the word is spread, and we now have a lot of friends on the mailing list. We don't have any budget, but we have passion, and we're asking some concerns. We want to express, we want you, and you'll have an opportunity. Panelists will be introduced by, I'll introduce the panelists, but then they will each have 5 minutes. And then our moderator will kind of go over the ground rules as well. I better stop. I just have one other thing to say. Waste is a behavior. we all created, we need to fashion a better system of handling it than to transport it long distances from areas of high populations to areas of less, out of sight, out of sound, out of mind. As a society, we need to be responsible for the waste we generate in our own backyards. We should not export our waste to the backyard of another. In my definition of neighborliness, this business of exporting your garbage doesn't meet that definition. I'd like now to quickly introduce the panel. First, Charlie Pronto is a resident of Newport, lifelong. He was a former mayor. He is also very community-minded. He's worked with the ambulance district as its, and now its director for over 30 years. He's a tireless worker for the community. Thank you, Charlie, for coming. Our next person is Chuck Schwer. Chuck is director of the Division of Solid Waste Management and Prevention from the Office of Agency of Natural Resources in Montpelier. And next is Kathy Jameson, who is manager of the Division of Solid Waste, also with the Agency of Natural Resources. I'll skip our moderator for a minute. And Robert Benoit, many of you Canadians know, is president of the longest environmental group in Quebec, Memphremagog Conservation Incorporated. And to his right is Ariane Orizi. I'm sorry for the pronunciation. And she is a biologist and concerned with the water quality for the same organization in Magog. And finally, Jen Duggan, certainly not last, Jen Duggan is an environmental lawyer, and she is currently the Vice President and Director of the Vermont chapter of Conservation Law Foundation. And she and her team did some amazing research on this whole subject. I'll turn it over now to Professor John Elder, Professor Emeritus at Middlebury College, I think now retired, or semi. John brings a broad academic background in the environment and many, and also kind of a Renaissance guy. He in English and in environmental studies. And he also plays an Irish flute for pleasure, as he joined with his wife. But he's a man of practical experience. He served on community committees, planning committees, and other commissions. And so we're very privileged, and believe me, he didn't have to do this. He's doing it as a volunteer because he believes in good citizenry. And thank you for coming. You are all good citizens to come tonight. John, it's your game.
Thank you. Now, the first thing to establish is how the sound system is working. Is it amplifying me here? I think the answer is no. So we're gonna move these mics back and forth on the table. We're just trying to get the lay of the land here. How about this? Does that work?
Maybe we should get the one
John, maybe we should just
Speak into it.
Was this better?
No, just speak
Speak
right.
into it.
How about now?
See?
That works?
Yeah.
Thank you for that good advice. What's that?
You stand up.
Oh, I'd be glad to.
Thank you.
This is good. No, it's good we have a long conversation. We'll try to get it right. So it would be best if those of us who speak up here stand up and hold the mic, right? And that's working now? Great. Thank you for that help.
Hold it close.
I'm holding it too close?
No.
Hold it closer? This is like a behavior modification experiment kind of in irresponsible psychology classes. So I just wanted to thank Henry and the whole group that's called themselves Dump for being responsible citizens and calling for a conversation that is intended to advance our understanding of our options. Specifically, having talked quite a bit with with Henry about this event. The intentions are to gather information, to hear diverse perspectives on the future of the Coventry landfill, and also to prepare for the possibility of further working sessions that might lead to concrete proposals. So it's really intended to be a meeting that both airs opinions, but also prepares for the possibility of a progressive encounter with these important issues. I am not a full-time resident of the Northeast Kingdom, though this is a part of the state we particularly love, and Quebec is a part of Canada that we particularly love because we're lovers of fine music and fine food, and it's our metropolis. So it's really exciting to think about this evening as a time to delve down. Hold it up. You're telling me that I should give somebody a kiss, or okay? So I'll keep do that again, or alternatively, you can do that, and we'll all try to do our best with that. So as Henry said, we're going to go right down the table with our panelists, each of whom has been invited to speak for up to 5 minutes. And they've already been introduced by Henry.
John?
Yes.
I neglected to say, and I'll try to speak loudly, we invited an 8th panelist to sit at the table as well, and that was a manager of Casella. They chose to decline, but I should say that.
Great, thank you. And so, anyway, I think that though I'm not a resident of the Northeast Kingdom, I feel engaged in this project, not just because of the kind of responsible citizenship it reflects, but because my wife Rita and I are residents of the town of Bristol. And when our picturesque horse-drawn trash wagon comes by to pick up our trash every week, it takes it first to the Middlebury transfer station, and it then ends up in the Coventry landfill. In other words, Coventry is a place that's of great significance to our approach to trash management for the entire state of Vermont. And thinking about its future really is an opportunity to think about the larger policies and systems on which this evening's conversation too will focus. Just a couple of words about procedure here. I'm not a substantive contributor to this conversation. My goal is to try to facilitate the conversation that the people here have. But just to follow up, so we'll have those 5 minutes per panelist. That'll start us off. And then we'll open up to comments from the audience. And this is also very important to us. We're hoping that everyone here who wants to say something about this topic will have a chance. In order to make that possible, we ask people to frame their comments within a presentation of about 2 minutes. You can actually say quite a bit in 2 minutes. You'll notice that there's no large clock up here or bell or car horn. We'll try to be informal and friendly in managing the time. But after 2 minutes is up, I will let you know that. I won't count down 10, 9, 8, but I'll let you know that the 2 minutes is up and encourage you to wrap up. The other way in which we hope to make it possible for everyone here to speak who'd like to, and we're hoping to round off by around 9, but if we're still going, we'll go later, is to ask the people who have spoken not speak a second time. Okay? There'll be, I'm sure, a lot of overlap among different points of view here. And when you do speak, you'll have comments, quite likely, or stories, examples to bring in. You might also have questions. And if you would like to direct your question to a particular member of the panel, please let us know that. Or if you just want to give a question to the panel in general. Now, there is a mic that will travel around the room, right over here. And so I'll try to recognize people who would like to speak. Please wait for the mic to come to you, and I'm modeling just how to use one. You'll hold it close to your mouth like this, and you'll stand up. And if you wouldn't mind, we'd like to ask that you begin by saying your name and your community. At the very end of the night, my other responsibility in addition to trying to help manage our time, will be to mention several topics and questions that seem to be particularly prominent in the evening's conversation as people go forward to think about how they might follow up on these things. I'll leave out something important to you. At that point, you can add it to that list, okay? So this is not a definitive list. It's just the best I've come up with, and we'll make it a little better, and then we'll round off, and we'll have a final word from Henry, I believe. Or not. Okay, so let's begin. And again, I'll ask that the panelists, too, rise and say their names again, and speak for 5 minutes. We'll pass it all the way down.
Hopefully my glasses are set up so I can stand and read it at the same time. I'm Charlie Pronto. I'm going to be the spokesman tonight for this section of it for Dump, Don't Undermine Memphremagog's Purity. And what I want to do is make everyone aware of what's happening in Coventry. First, Coventry is the only Vermont permitted lined landfill, and it's atop and on the edge of the Black River, a huge wetland, and obviously Lake Memphremagog and South Bay. Casella is applying to the state to almost double the size and to be permitted for another 22 years. They have almost 4 years remaining on their current permit. The state of Vermont and the Agency of Natural Resources have no other waste disposal options for Vermont beyond Coventry. No short-term, no long-term. So that's a concern. Why should we all be concerned? Well, first, most if not all of Vermont's garbage is being trucked throughout the state to the Northeast Kingdom at a tune of 2,000 tons a day, over 500,000 tons a year. Additionally, Coventry receives trash on a daily basis from New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey, New York, and some from Canada. Most of this out-of-state trash is stuff like asbestos, coal ash, sludge or coal ash from incinerators or landfills, contaminated soil, contaminated construction debris, and even medical waste. One can only assume that this garbage is all too dangerous or hazardous for those states to deal with. My information is coming directly from the runs that were sent to me by the Agency of Natural Resources. I had about 300 pages I had to go through. All this garbage and hazardous waste is dumped into Coventry's plastic liners to rot, ferment, decompose. This process creates leachate, a highly toxic garbage juice that forms at the bottom and is collected by a drainage system to several wells. The toxic leachate is removed and trucked to a wastewater treatment plant to be treated, and the residue, supposedly safe liquid, is released into the lake. The non-liquid residue sludge is sent back to the landfills. But it's not just the Northeast Kingdom or Memphremagog that has to worry or has to be alarmed. This leachate is currently trucked to Newport City wastewater treatment plant, Montpelier's, and Plattsburgh, New York's. Therefore, the supposedly safe treated liquid is being released into not only Lake Memphremagog, but also Montpelier's Dog River, to the Winooski, eventually to Lake Champlain and other waterways throughout the state. Plattsburgh releases their material directly into Lake Champlain. So several other wastewater treatment plants have been certified and may have already received leachate. I wasn't being able to get that for sure, but they have been certified on occasion, including North Burlington and Rutland. Here are the alarming numbers. In 2017, the total leachate recovered and treated from Coventry was over 11 million gallons, of which went to the following wastewater treatment plants: Newport City, 4,846,000 gallons; Montpelier, 5,761,000 gallons; and Plattsburgh, 600,000 gallons. And the Agency of Natural Resources says that from August 2017 to August 2018, that figure was 12,500,000. So it continues to increase as more trash is collected and the landfill is expanded. Now the problem with leachate is what the EPA has to say about leachate, and here are some quotes. I did some research. One, this is quotes from the EPA website. There is evidence that hazardous leachate fluids in a land landfill will eventually migrate from the facility into the broader environment. Two, even the best available landfill disposal technology, leaking will occur. Three, all man-made materials used for liners are subject to eventual deterioration, and although it may occur 10, 20, or more years from installation, it will eventually occur, and leachate will migrate out of the facility. Those that argue that liners provide a perpetual seal are contradicted by EPA results that state forcefully all landfills will eventually leak. According to the EPA, although collection wells that capture most of the leaks, they will also eventually fail. There are also several articles about using wastewater treatment plants to treat leachate, and the consensus seems to be municipal waste treatment facilities do not treat for several harmful chemicals that are in landfill waste because they were never designed to do that. Finally, what do we want? What does Dump want? What do we want for the citizens? Currently, Casella collects the samples and does all the testing required of them by the Agency of Natural Resources. Casella gives their results to the state to analyze. We want third-party testing done for all impacts. Leachate prior to treatment, samples of the wastewater treatment plant fluid released after the leachate is treated, and testing the environment around the landfill, including wells, the river, the lake, as well as air quality test from the site. Although Casella does have an air quality control permit to satisfy the solid waste division rule, it only addresses odor. These air samples and tests are also done by Casella. So currently, no air quality tests are required for advanced health effects that some studies caution about, such as respiratory illness, birth defects, skin irritation, or cancer-causing carcinogens. We want Act 250 party status for our group, Dump, and our Canadian neighbors who have 185,000 plus residents that get their drinking water from Lake Memphremagog. We want the state to immediately begin looking for alternative sites and options for future trash. We are okay with dealing with our own trash in our own backyard, but we do not want to continue to be the dumping grounds for all of Vermont and most of New England. Thank you. We want to preserve our environment and our lake for our children, our grandchildren, our neighbors, because it's the right thing to do. We need your support. Thank you very much for coming tonight.
Henry, thanks a lot for having me go right after this guy. Nice guy. Hi everyone, my name is Chuck Schwer. I'm the director of our Waste Management Division for the Agency of Natural Resources. I really appreciate being invited here. Henry did mention our other public hearing was very few people, so it's nice to have everyone here so we can hear from you. Our intent is, our intent is definitely to hear from you, but we're also hoping that you'll hear from us so you understand exactly what Kathy and I work for the same program, what it is that our permit represents, and what it is that we do to make sure that that landfill is run in an environmentally safe manner. As Henry mentioned, the old, and many of you may remember, the old method was to have a landfill in every community, and everyone handled their own waste. It was unlined. That was truly a mess. Part of what we do as well in my division is deal with contamination after it gets into the environment. And we're still dealing today, 30 years later, with unlined landfill that has groundwater contamination. So the landfill in Coventry, although there were some issues raised, of which many of the points Charlie mentioned were accurate, some were not, and hopefully we'll have a chance to share that information. But this landfill is so much better than the old way. I'm not saying it's not fraught with some issues, and you guys are bringing up great issues, and I look forward to our dialogue today so that we can understand your concerns, you can understand what our rules and regulations allow us to permit, and where the shortcomings may be, because we do have legislators in the room. But just one last piece I'd like to share with you. The last point made that we don't want a landfill, one landfill for the entire state. That's not in the permit anything that we control. Right now it's a private sector decision as to where to invest multi-million dollars to site a landfill. Small communities can't afford to do a landfill. 2 reasons. They don't have the resources to build it and operate it. But second, the laws don't allow a community to control the flow. So they can't say Chittenden County's waste has to stay in Chittenden. I was on the Chittenden County Solid Waste Board back when we voted to acquire a property in Williston to build a lined landfill. We ended up getting that property, but at the same time a flow control law was overturned, which wouldn't allow the county to control the flow or keep it. So Chittenden Solid Waste District couldn't guarantee they'd get enough trash in their landfill to pay the cost. Especially with the largest hauler in Chittenden County was Casella. So we knew if Casella had all the routes and picked up all the garbage, of course they would take it to their line facility. So at this point, Chittenden Solid Waste District had, and I'm no longer on the board, so I don't speak for them, I'm just sharing when I was 15, 20 years ago, that we voted not to move forward with that because we couldn't control the garbage where it went. So these are some of the challenges. We're not saying they're not valid. We'd like to hear from you, your thoughts, and I think my message is work with your legislators. If that's a really critical issue, how do we get over some of the hurdles to have a regional landfill in every community, and how do we pay for it? Because they are very expensive. So with that, I'm going to sit down. Kathy Jamison works for me. She really knows the ins and outs of the solid waste rules, and just will give you an overview, high level, of what we, in our permit, which is the one under consideration right now, what that entails and what things we look at when we do that permit.
Thanks, Chuck. And again, thank you all for coming out tonight. It's great to see that everyone is very interested in what is happening in Vermont environmentally and with our waste. And one of the things I think... Oops, sorry about that. One of the things that I think we all share in common is that we all want our waste to be managed safely in a very responsible manner. And so I think one of the things I'd like to happen tonight is for us to build on that shared common ground. And to keep in mind, like Henry was pointing out, do you want to be an importer or exporter? I think one thing to think about as a state, even though we have excellent programs to try to reduce the waste that we generate, to try to recycle more, to promote composting, and we are further along than many other states, we still generate. Our small state still generates 500,000 tons of waste that needs to be disposed a year. That's 500,000 tons of waste that we need to find a home for somewhere. And that somewhere needs to be safe. And so what we'd like to do is talk a little bit about how landfills in general are regulated, and then if we have specific questions about this one. And so the waste that is disposed needs to be managed in actually double-line facility. So any application for a landfill has to meet all the requirements of the solid waste rules and the groundwater protection rules. And the solid waste rules have provision in there for the design of the landfill, so that's 2 liners so that you have that backup liner. There's monitoring in between the liners so we can find out if there's early detection for the leak, if there's any leakage in the first liner. There's monitoring under the second liner, and this particular landfill also has a drainage that's a drainage pipe underneath the whole landfill. That's another kind of like backup monitoring that goes on. The rules require the monitoring of the groundwater in the vicinity of the landfill. That's another provision that we have for assessing the site quality, and any early detection before any leakage would leave the site. Vermont DEC has a strong record for implementing our public health and environmental protection, and I'd like to point at how we managed the Moortown landfill application and permit, and we denied the continuation of the operation of that landfill because they were not in compliance with the rules. We need to continue, any landfill that is allowed to operate has to continue to demonstrate a performance-based operation. So it's not just they show it the first time and they get to keep going. They have to continue to monitor, to continue to demonstrate that they meet the provisions and the rules, that they meet the groundwater standards, and that the agency has the right to require corrective action if there's any sign of issues that need to be corrected. With that, getting back at the amount of waste that we are generating, municipalities, like Chuck said, could have a landfill, but it is very, very expensive for them to make that investment and to risk not having the material come to that landfill. And our policy in Vermont, we do have policies to try to reduce the amount of waste, but none of our policies direct where landfills are sited. That the state statute right now allows that decision to be done more on a case-by-case basis, and so we don't direct that it has to be done in a particular region. But if there is a landfill, it needs to meet all the provisions of the rules. With respect to groundwater monitoring, we did review the application and found that we wanted, and we did request the applicant to do one more round of testing, and this time to test for what we call perfluorinated compounds. Those are the more recent compounds that I think Henry was referring to. And we found that in the line section of the landfill, we do have results. I did not anticipate so many people coming tonight, so at the end, if you want a copy, you can come up and get it. But in essence, the line section of the landfill meets the groundwater protection standards. The unlined section of the let me start that one again. The unlined section of the landfill, one of the groundwater monitoring wells that's right next to where that waste, we suspect where that waste ends, does have concentrations above the health advisory drinking water standard. We are considering what to do next. One of the options is to have additional testing at what we would call a point of compliance, and that is a certain distance away from where the edge of the waste is to see if the contaminant is migrating. So in essence, the line, the constructed, designed, engineered line section of the landfill meets the compliance of our rules. The online landfill, we need additional data to indicate what would be the next steps. And with that, I think I'll end that and pass it on.
Thank you. Let's put this microphone here and see if we can. Is this operating?
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Robert Benoit. I'm the president of the largest environmental organization on Lake Memphremagog called Memphremagog Conservation. We exist for the last 51 years, and 51 years ago, this lake was a real mess. And when we start in 1967, the lake was in worse shape than it is now. We worked very hard in the last 51 years to improve the lake. Let me give you some example. We first of all stopped our own garbage site along the lake, was in Magog. It was quite a battle. There was more people than there is here tonight to close that site. We win this battle. Then we went to municipality and we said we want municipal inspector. Then we went to golf club, and then we went to boat, and we want to have seal tank on boat. So it took 51 years to get there, and slowly we getting happy to see, well, I think we are improving the lake. It's our mission. tonight I feel a little bit like Joe, my neighbors, your neighbors, who just knock in your door in the middle of your party and say, hey Henry, don't put your garbage along my well. I don't like that. Please put your garbage further than my well. That's the message that I'm giving you tonight. The garbage is quite close from the water we drink. We are 170,000 people in Sherbrooke, Reynoldsville, Magog, I can go on and on. There's quite a number of municipalities there who drink that water. And to tell you the truth, we are worried. What I learned, getting older and older every day, is that big problems in the environment are very tough to solve. Acid rain. For years we know we were throwing all type of garbage in the air. First thing we know, the trees were dying. It took generations to get back to normal there. Then we got, many years ago, we were called that the world was warming up. Some people don't believe in it. One person in particular don't believe in it. I'm an expedition, sorry about this one. But the large people in the world believe that the world is warming up. And now what do we do next after the world is too hot? The bottom of ocean now is full of plastic. You read the paper today about it. The boat is going to try to pick up plastic garbage. It's going to take generations to get there. The idea is before things get worse, we have to get working on it. My friend tonight, what I'm asking you is that, first of all, that this lake be recognized by the state of Vermont as a drinking water reservoir. In Quebec, when we talk about Nymphe-Magog Lake, we know that's the water we're going to use. That's the water our children are going to use, and we have to be very careful about it. The other thing we're asking is that whatever expansion is going to be permitted to that site be as minimum as it can. That improvement on recuperation and all these nice things that the lady said had to be implemented very quickly. And the last, and I will leave Ariane to talk to you about it, in 1994, when they start to do the cleaning of the leaching in the Newport facility, they stopped testing what was coming in the lake in 1994. We are requesting that over and above all the testing that the site done, that whatever come out of that pipe be tested for toxicity. 80,000 chemical products come in this lake, and the problem between lake and a river, as you know, in a river, we say pollution is the solution to pollution. But in the lake, there is no dilution. In the lake, it stayed there. In this case, it stayed in the lake for 2 years, and it built up. There is a scientific example of that Ariane may explain to you. So, I will finish with Henry asked me to read that to you, and I think it's so right. And after that, Henry, I have a gift for you. In 1909, we were quite young, all of us, there was an international joint commission who got created. And it still exists, and actually they're working on the lake at this point between NWA, who is the organization of the US part of the lake, and MCI. And I want to say hello to these people. The president of MWA is here tonight, I believe. Will you stand up, Mary Pat? Yeah, Mary Pat is the president of the American side of the Lake Association. Well, that organization was created in 1909 by the federal government, and the goal of that association, the International Joint Commission, is, the Article 4 say, water flowing across the boundary shall not be polluted on either side. That, it's in 1909. We are in 1918, and we are questioning if you are or not polluting the border. Ladies and gentlemen, I will stop here. we are 1,200 members. We want to bring all of them here tonight, but it's very tough to go through the border these days. So we just brought about 35 of them, but they all asked me to give you a little bit gift to Henry and his gang, who is doing a fantastic job to remember that across the border, 170,000 people drink that water. Thank you very much, Henry.
Hello, good evening everyone. My name is Ariane Orjic. I'm General Manager of NCI. So, as you know, Castella is now applying for a 51-acre expansion of the landfill, which will allow it to bury 500 tons a year of waste for 22 additional years. The site is located adjacent to the Black River. Located at the top of Lake Memphremagog, the lake flows north from the US to Canada, where 73% of the lake lies. In Canada, 6 municipalities are located on the lake shore, and more than 185,000 people drink the water from the lake, including the cities of Sherbrooke and Magog. The lake is also important for the region because of its recreational value, its touristic attraction, its highly valued natural resource, and a lot of fishermen consume fishes from the lake. This makes Lake Memphremagog one of the most important lakes in the province of Quebec, and the need to protect Lake Memphremagog from potential sources of pollution cannot be overstated. The waste buried in the landfill contains thousands of contaminants, including heavy metals, volatile organic compounds, endocrine disruptive pharmaceuticals, and other contaminants of emerging concern. Some part of the landfill, called the nadal cells, are old and unlined. Preventing contaminants from migrating from these parts to Lake Memphremagog is already a major concern for us. Now the proposed Coventry landfill expansion will be required to have a 2-liner composite system, but the liners in landfills often develop holes during installation, and they develop holes and cracks over time. Also, an operational failure or a natural disaster like a flood will have disastrous consequences for the lake and the population. Because of the importance of Lake Memphremagog as a drinking reservoir, MCI believes that the precautionary principle must be applied, and that this site should never have been authorized for landfill in the first place. The last landfill on the Canadian side on the Lake Memphremagog watershed closed many years ago. Also, Vermont water quality standards afford special status to public water supplies. If Lake Memphremagog was recognized as a drinking reservoir by Vermont, the establishment of the new waste management zones in Coventry will be prohibited. A Canadian report conducted in 2004 concluded that it will be risky and imprudent to discharge leachate into Lake Memphremagog, a critical drinking water supply, due to the risk of unknown and unregulated contaminants. The report found that leachate analysis does not include many chemicals whose impacts are unknown when they bioaccumulate in fishes. Considering the wide variety of products found in a landfill, this report used to restrict all leachate discharge into the lake's watershed. Despite the recommendation of the study, since 2009, a part of the leachate from the landfill is treated at the Newport wastewater treatment facility. The treatment plant was designed to treat municipal wastewater, not landfill leachate. The leachate discharge permit requires quarterly sampling of some contaminants such as metals, and only one annual sampling of many contaminants of concern, such as organic compounds and chemicals. But the all effluent toxicity test, called wet test, are not done at the Newport plant outlet since 2008. And Casella has treated leachate at the plant since 2009. The wet test is used in Vermont and Quebec wastewater treatment plants to determine whether a wastewater will have toxic effects on the organisms in the receiving water. So the fate of leachate contaminants throughout the treatment process and the cumulative effects in Lake Memphremagog are unknown. Again, if Lake Memphremagog was recognized as a drinking reservoir by Vermont, the discharge of wastewater will be prohibited regardless of the degree of treatment provided. In closing, NCI already has significant concerns regarding the actual impacts of the landfill on Lake Memphremagog. For the reasons mentioned previously, NCI is against the expansion of the landfill, against the treatment of the leachate in Newport's wastewater plant, and has the desire to see Lake Memphremagog be recognized by Vermont as a drinking water reservoir. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Jen Duggan and I'm with the Conservation Law Foundation. And I just want to thank Henry and Dump for hosting this meeting and for all of you for making time to come this evening. This is a really important issue and I appreciate all the panelists being here and you all for coming. A lot of folks have made some very good points on the panel today. I don't want to repeat things that folks have said, but I do want to just make 2 points, I think. One, CLF has basically asked for the agency to deny the application until Casella can show that, until there's been a thorough investigation of any releases, and Casella has shown that those have been, the landfill is not leaking and those are cleaned up. And then also that the state actually fully implements a universal recycling law and determines what capacity we actually need. This is a really massive expansion that will allow dumping to continue for another 22 years. And we have really wonderful recycling and composting laws. Let's make sure that we fully implement those before we authorize an expansion. So I just started to talk about, the groundwater and releases from the landfill. The landfill, there's a couple of reasons why we are concerned here. The landfill is already leaking pollution into the groundwater. We know that the unlined areas, Casella has already acknowledged that there are heavy metals that are in the groundwater from those unlined landfills. We just learned that there is also PFAS from unlined landfills. I think the concentration is at 116 parts per trillion, and our drinking water health advisory is 20 parts per trillion. With respect to the lined landfill, there are elevated levels of metals that are down gradient from the lined landfill. And the agency has expressed concern over those levels over the past couple of years. And Casella has, responded that these levels are high because there are shallow groundwater wells and wetlands, and so this is what we would expect in this type of groundwater. But we're not convinced that a thorough investigation has been done to really prove up that assertion that this is just naturally occurring metals. With respect to the PFAS testing, down gradient of the lined landfills, my understanding is that there were detections down in a well down gradient of the lined landfill, it did not exceed the health advisory, but it is in the water, in the groundwater. And so that should give everybody pause for concern. We need a full investigation to ensure that the lined areas are not leaking, and there's a plan in place to clean up groundwater from the unlined landfills and also the lined landfills. And the other point I want to make is that, you know, we, and some of the other panelists have made this point, is that, you know, liners are not foolproof, they're not fail-proof. This waste is going to stay in the ground for a really long time. And the plastic liners will deteriorate over time. And so, you know, CLF is asking the state to delay approval of this expansion until there is a robust investigation done of releases from this landfill, and there's remediation to address any contamination that's leaking. And then, again, I think that, you know, it's important to note that we have the ability to reduce our waste. Vermonters reduced waste by 40,000 tons in 2 years between 2014 and 2016. And if we continue on that trajectory, we're just going to continue to reduce the amount of waste that we need to find a home for. And the other thing I'll leave you with is that the last time the state did a study on what is in the waste that we're disposing of, 67% of it could have been composted, recycled. That's a huge percentage of waste that we could have just been diverted completely. That's not even waste reduction. That's just diverting the waste from the landfill. So I'll stop there. I'm sure you all have lots of questions, and I'm looking forward to answering any questions that folks have.
I'd like to thank the panelists for giving such concise and concrete presentations. It gives us something to respond to and to talk about. And, right?
I'm not moving till the end.
Oh, okay. Now for questions. And what I'd like to ask, please, if you would raise your hands, and I'll try to move around the room, not always look in the same quadrant, and then wait for the microphone to come to you and identify yourself and make your points. So please, here's a man here who'd like to, he's standing up.
How you doing? My name is John Wilson, and I'm a resident of Newport. I only really have one question. As critical as this is for the drinking water in Lake Memphremagog, and knowing how much money will come in through Casella and to the town that it's in, why are we letting Casella do all their own testing? Why isn't the state testing Casella?
Very good question, and as I mentioned in my introduction, I've also overseen the hazardous waste site cleanup program, and it's standard for us when we require a responsible party for them to hire an independent consultant and lab. So Casella does not do the sampling, they hire someone. We have the ability to split samples, which means we can take our own, which we've done. And in terms of the discussion on the leachate, we actually collected that sample using our own consultant. So we feel that that's really not an issue. I understand your concern, but this is an independent, and especially the laboratories, they have to show us their credentials, their quality control data. It would be very difficult for them to get away with fudging the data or slipping in samples. I mean, we have the ability to test them, and we do test them. It's just we put the burden on the responsible party. So in this case, Casella has to pay They hire a consultant that's independent. Craig Heindel does a lot of their groundwater work. He's out of Burlington. He is an independent consultant, and his reputation depends on him being honest, and we believe they are, and there are checks and balances to make sure they are. But that's an excellent question, and thank you for raising it.
Are there other panelists who'd like to speak to that issue?
Yeah, from what I saw in the reports that so it was the same individual, Samuel, is that Sam? I wish I was looking for that. But it's the same person that's doing the testing over and over again. And as he said, they are hired by Casella. So maybe it's not Casella, but it's their employee that's doing it.
Their consultant.
Consultant, whatever. What we would like to see is to allow us, or with the assistance of any groups that want to assist us, is to have a totally independent group collect the samples, have access to collect the samples and do the testing. That's what we want. And then we'd feel really a lot more comfortable than Casella collecting their own samples, doing their own testing, and you guys analyzing it. So that's our...
The question we raise is why in 2008 the municipality of Newport stopped testing the water coming out of the pipe in the lake. And that's, I asked the Director General of Casella on open line last Wednesday, and he said, well, I don't know why, and just has the chemical of my company, but we were not able to reach them. So why is Newport stop testing the pipe coming in the lake?
I don't work in the watershed division, but I've been informed that the City of Newport wastewater treatment plant just recently conducted the wet test that you referred to. We are waiting pending the results. I don't know why it was stopped, but it is now starting again, so I can share that with you.
I should be on your open line more often, I just
if I can, with respect to the drinking water, because I think that's something that we all care about, is the quality of Lake Memphremagog, whether we swim in it or use it for drinking water supply or whatnot. So the agency has looked carefully at what the impact of the leachate is when it's managed at the Newport City wastewater treatment plant. And we looked at the concentration of the PFAS chemicals that are in the leachate, and we actually did testing of the leachate and of the influent to the treatment plant and what's coming out of the treatment plant. We also did what we call modeling, and that's looking at kind of like worst case scenario as far as if the concentration in the discharge from the plant is of such concentration at low flows. Now this treatment plant discharges directly to the Clyde River, which is a short reach before it goes into the lake. And that modeling demonstrates that for PFAS, that it is well within the drinking water standards in the Clyde River, and that's before it gets into Lake Memphremagog. So from the PFAS perspective, we don't see that as being a risk to a drinking water supply. So I hope that helps.
Over here, question over here, please.
My name is Harry Miller. I'm from Craftsbury Common, and I have a question for the agency. I was surprised to hear the number of different states that bring their trash to Vermont. And who profits from the delivery of those wastes to Coventry, and why is Vermont accepting trash from other states is my question.
Great question. I think this gets back to Henry's point at the beginning. Are we exporters or are we importers? And actually, we do some of each in Vermont. And that, I think, has to do with location. The southern part of the state of Vermont is exporting our waste to mostly New Hampshire and New York. And we do receive some waste from other states. And I don't believe as many of the states as you listed. I was surprised to hear so many. But they are what we call special waste. So it's not the trash coming from residents or businesses, because that's not allowed unless they have an approved solid waste implementation plan, and only municipalities from Vermont have those so far. But on a case-by-case basis, when chemical testing has been done of that waste and demonstrate that it is not hazardous waste and it's uniform in nature, then they can get approval to bring that in state. If you look at the balance of how much are we exporting, how much are we importing, we export more than we import. In 2016, we exported 50,000 tons more than we imported. It was closer in 2017.
Who's speaking? Somebody have a question and began? I was seeing a question back here earlier. If there's, were you speaking?
Additional question. Who benefits from bringing stuff into this?
Is this also from you, Harry? Did you ask that question?
These are two parts. So the landfill in Coventry is privately owned, and so yes, they charge a tip fee, but they also have to manage that, and they are responsible for the risks associated with that. So it's a, it's two-way street. So there is, a benefit to Vermont when we export our materials to New Hampshire and New York as well. So I think we need to think carefully if we're going to, close that drawbridge up. We need to be able to manage our own waste. And what I'm hearing from people tonight is that that managing waste is something that is of concern, and we want to make sure it's done safely.
Now, a couple of people were getting started. I saw a question back here with your hand up there, and then you're next. You had one after that. So right there she is in blue sweater. Coming your way. And we'll really try to get somebody over here got a question in line too. We'll get you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Louise Abbott. I have a couple of questions. One is for the second panelist. You suggested that the first panelist had delivered some inaccurate information, but you never specified what that information was. And the second is, a number of people have mentioned the possibility of having Lake Memphremagog declared as a drinking water reservoir. What would be the steps necessary for that to happen, and what would be the impact of that?
So we have two questions. First, the question of what was incorrect, and then we'll talk some more about the drinking water designation.
So relative to what Charlie reported, most of what he reported was accurate. It was just a little bit of a spin that got me ruffled. The way he characterized the out-of-state waste, it's not municipal solid waste. It is a special waste. It does have to be tested to make sure it's not hazardous. There isn't any toxics that could lead to groundwater contamination or airborne. But the one thing I want to remind folks, and I don't know if it's going to make you feel better or not, but Vermont, we're very progressive. We're one of the leaders in terms of getting certain waste streams out of the landfills. We have an electronic waste collection program where all your TVs, monitors can get disposed of free. We have a battery collection program now. We have a paint care program. What am I?
Mercury added products.
Yeah, mercury added products. That's not to say we've made our waste clean. There's certainly other contaminants of concern, and we've talked about perfluorinated compounds, which we're looking at. But we're doing what we can to get as much of the toxic waste out of landfills so that we don't have a toxic leachate. So it wasn't that Charlie was totally wrong, just some of the facts were, in my opinion, not quite right. Generally, he's right, but not entirely, and so that's really what I was kind of bristling about. But in terms of the
question.
I think I did.
Well, you didn't tell us what.
Yes, I did. So I'm sorry, I don't. So in terms of the characterization of the waste being toxic and hazardous, and the fact that he characterized municipal waste coming in, which wasn't accurate, and then some of the states, I don't really think we see that, but it's something that I'll talk to him and find out where he got that information. But in terms of designating the lake as a drinking water source, I'm going to ask Kathy to take a shot at that. That wouldn't be us, but
So our agency has lots of different programs, and so the drinking water is a different program, and we don't have a representative from that part of the agency tonight. My understanding with designating large bodies, and that comes from Lake Champlain. So let's just for a second think about Lake Champlain. That is a drinking water source for about 25% of Vermonters. You know, most of Chittenden County gets their drinking water source from Lake Champlain. Lots of activities are allowed on that lake, even though it's, you know, it is a drinking water supply. And so, you know, we have different classifications for water bodies in Vermont. And perhaps people are thinking of like the Class A designation, which is like a pristine mountain stream. Lake Champlain does not qualify for that, and neither would Lake Memphremagog, because you can't have all the uses that you enjoy on the lake, like all the boatings and marinas and all the housing that's nearby. You know, those activities play into whether or not a water body can be designated a certain designation. So, so with the designation of a drinking water supply, it doesn't mean you can't have a wastewater treatment plant, because Lake Champlain does certainly have, you know, Burlington has 3 treatment plants, South Burlington has 2, you have Winooski and Essex all going into there. So it's making sure that those activities are compatible with, but are not prevented from occurring in that water body.
Yeah, I just want to speak, and we're not going to have a huge debate. I just talked to him, told him I would send him the material. I got my information from the 2017 quarterly reports from the Agency of Natural Resources, from Jeff Bordeaux. He sent it to me. I told you there were about 300 pages. I broke it down and deciphered it. The terms that I used for asbestos, coal ash, sludge, contaminated soil, contaminated construction debris, and medical waste are what is listed on your website. And what they do is they show where all of the waste comes from in every community in Vermont, and then after that it's all the out of state. And the states that I mentioned were all states that were listed. It doesn't give me towns, it just gives me the states, and it gives me the material. And the material words that I use are the exact words that I got off your website. So, thank you.
Thank you. I asked the Director General of Casella last week on that same open line if they checked the truck coming in the site. Right. And the people who are listening to me tonight, who were listening last Wednesday, the answer was, well, then there was a long silence. I thought that the radio station was dead. And he said, well, sometimes we do spot checking. So I was not really happy with that kind of answer. What I understand, and the next answer was, we don't really check it at the site, but we ask the people who put the garbage in the truck, the company or the municipality, them to check it.
So we have a couple of people in line. I'm going to get them first, but I'm not. This woman over here, and then you're after that. You've been waiting. So, but you began to speak earlier. Would you like to?
Hi. I just was wondering if anyone knows, Susanna Bowman, Albany, Vermont, if anyone here knows whether the technology presently exists to adequately clean the water from one of these water treatment plants. I mean, you're mentioning that there's, you know, this, that, and the other thing that we don't exactly know what they are. We don't know how to get rid of them because our water treatments were designed really to get rid of agricultural waste and so on. Sewage. Does anybody know if these technologies presently exist, and if so, how come we don't have them? And could the people who are profiting by the trash perhaps pay for them?
Anybody want to pick that up?
So, great question. We want to make sure that, again, this is our trash. Okay, this is all material that we are placing in our garbage and that we are sending to the landfill. So I think part of this is, we need to own this problem in that we're generating the trash. Vermonters are generating 500,000 tons of trash a year. We try to make sure that we have a system that is safe, that we are protecting the public health and the environment. We do have monitoring in place. The groundwater monitoring that Jen Duggan was mentioning before, that there's a little bit of PFAS detected down gradient, that is still within our drinking water standards. So I think the expectation should be is when should we say further treatment is needed? If you're meeting drinking water standards, do you need to eliminate it entirely? So what is it that we're looking for as far as, do we want nothing, or do we want to have it within a particular standard? And the reason why, over the time, we have developed standards for us to implement is to say, if it's within this range, that is within something that is okay for us to have. And so that's where we rely on the health department to give us those standards, like the parts per trillion, the 20 parts per trillion for the PFAS. And so those are the standards that we look at and rely on. And to ask for it to go less than that is going beyond that kind of that assessment that is in place. Do you want to add to that?
Here's a question over here. Oh, just quickly, just a response from Jim Duggan. You're right, Juan.
I would just add that there are treatment technologies in place for PFAS, activated carbon filtration. So there is technology to remove PFAS from water.
But we don't have it.
That's right.
Can I have just one follow-up, which I think answers the question? Henry did very accurately report that there's 11 million gallons of leachate generated a year, and the leachate is, you've seen when your compost leaks, it is kind of a, did you call it a juice? Garbage juice. It is,
Yeah.
It is pretty robust, and our wastewater treatment plants can treat the organic part, but the chemical parts create a challenge, and I think it would be extremely costly. I'm not saying it shouldn't be done, but those are questions that we've already started asking, and based on this response, we're going to ask, what would it cost to treat 11 million gallons? But I think Kathy's really correct in saying, to what standard? If the discharge is already meeting the standard, that's where we're really challenged. But that's a really great point.
Thank you for your patience. Here we have here it comes.
My name is Agnes Power. I come from Quebec, the Georgeville area. I really do like the idea of declaring the lake a drinking water reservoir. I'm wondering, what can Canadians do, considering a lot of us are affected by the quality of the water in the lake? What can Canadians do to help this process, to encourage different changes in Vermont or improvements? I guess this answer is both the questions for Robert Benoit and also Jen Duggan. Has it ever been, has a recreational lake ever been declared a drinking water reservoir? Pie in the sky.
Yeah, I would just, as Kathy pointed out, Lake Champlain is a drinking water source. And so recreational lakes are drinking water sources. This is not unusual. To your question in terms of what you can do, I think showing up tonight is very important. I think voicing your concerns with decision makers, both at the agency and the Vermont administration, is really important.
Last Wednesday, I believe, NCI met the Canadian Minister of International Affairs, Madame Bibeau, who's a very dedicated woman. And we also met the Mayor of Magog, who's one of the municipalities where they drink the water, and there was a representative from the city of Sherbrooke. And what I discovered the weekend before when I read all the literature that I can put my hand on is that fonctionnaire, how do you say that en français, en anglais?
Bureaucrats.
Bureaucrat. Talk to each other. Talk to each other from Quebec, Canada, United States, and Vermont. That's great. They write document to each other. And they seem to go along very well. But I think the time is up for politicians to stand up. And these issues will be solved by political pressure on not only on the minister, but on all the M&A and all your governors and senators and mayor of municipality. I was in politics for 40 years, and when you get a citizen in your office who claims that he's being, you know, not treated properly by the province of Canada, it has so much power then. You know, you go out to your parliament and you fight for it. So I invite you to take a stand.
There are a couple of people who've really been wanting to get in. I want to recognize this man and then this man over here, and then we'll come back around. Just trying to get a little space around the room. So you're in the queue, but first right here, this man. Right here. Thank you. Question for a while.
Thank you very much. My name is Brian Smith. I'm from Derby. I have a question for Ms. Jameson. You mentioned when you made your presentation that there was an unlined section of the landfill?
Yes, sir.
Is it a permitted unlined section?
It's not being used at this point in time. It was closed out around 1992, so more than 25 years ago.
But there is still
It's
stuff coming out
under
of
its
it.
cap. Well, you can't see it from the top. We have required groundwater monitoring wells in the vicinity of the online landfill. But you can't collect, because there's no liner, leachate can't be collected from the unlined portion. Leachate is collected on the lined portions where you can pump the liquid from what's collected.
Did you mention in your presentation that there was testing coming from that unlined section that is not testing well, or not testing good?
Okay, so in a monitoring well that's right adjacent to what we believe to be the edge of that unlined landfill, it's hard to know exactly where that edge is, that did have a positive result, higher than the drinking water standard for the PFAS chemicals. What we want to do, the next step likely would be is to test a little bit further away, is that migrating? That would be the question we would want answered.
So
right on the edge of the unlined landfill, we are finding PFAS chemicals.
So that probably should be fixed before any more permitting is allowed, shouldn't it?
Well, whatever happens in the line section really doesn't impact the unlined section. In fact, the line section is further away from the lake and the Black River, and it doesn't really have an impact on the unlined section.
I've got another easy question for you. How did ANR or the state of Vermont let this landfill get so big?
Okay, so it's a good question. And I think let is maybe not the choice of word that I would make. The unlined landfill had to be closed in the early 90s because we were requiring all the online landfills in Vermont to be closed. And like Chuck said at the beginning, many municipalities throughout the state had these what were properly called dumps because they weren't lined, they weren't managed right, or whatnot. So we had to close those out to protect public health and the environment. Okay, so that we didn't let that happen anymore. Then we developed rules for these engineered line facilities where they had to meet certain standards as far as they have to have separation to groundwater, bedrock, surface waters, etc., etc. This site met those standards, and then over time they came in for different phases of the site. And so right now the pending application is for phase 6 of the landfill. So it's happened kind of incrementally over time where they've demonstrated compliance with the rules.
Thank you.
So we'll send the mic over here, and you've had a question for some time. Then I'm really going to try to get to everybody. I know that I see the people in the front rows better than I see the people in the back rows. So after this, I'm going to look for a couple of questions at least. In fact, we're going to circle around. This is not saying the front rows are done. But please.
Bonnie Miller, Lindenville, and I just want to thank everybody. It's incredible the turnout here, and I think it manifests how important this issue is to all of us. We're all part of this issue, and that we got to solve it together. And I really appreciate the panel's efforts here. It's really been very informative. And but I think, all that being said, I think we're missing the whole point here tonight. And Ms. Duggan alluded to a statistic that I've seen, I've witnessed in Lindenville, and I think it might even be worse than what she said as a figure. I think you said 67% of the materials in an audit could have been recycled or composted, and that was a waste audit.
Statewide waste audit in 2013.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing from the panel is from Mr. Schwer saying, and it's a valid approach to worry about the leachate and the contamination in the environment. And he quoted a consultant, Mr. Craig Heindel, who I'm familiar with, I used to work for, in fact, who is a very honest consultant and is going to give the proper data. I second that for you, Mr. Schwer. Well put. And Ms. Jameson, despite her interesting information and helpful information, I sense sort of a focus on landfill configuration and structure, and my point is that we're missing the point that we need to be worrying about the input and not the output. And if there's truly 67% of the material that can still be properly disposed, then we should be talking about that. And I'd like to know what the educational outreach is for this situation, so we can get that 67%. I know in Lindenville, on my street, in Main Street, that about 7 of the 8 neighbors that I have, I know for a fact they don't recycle. I never see them at the recycling center. I don't see them put out recyclables. They're just putting it in the landfill. And so that figure is spot on, Jen. So thank you for bringing that up. So I'd like to know, I'd like to at least make one proposition, is that there's, in Woodbury, Vermont, the Fish and Wildlife Department holds a conservation camp for educators. Why not, and I'm going to propose to everybody tonight, why not have a recycling camp for educators, a week-long excursion for them to learn everything that you experts can bring from your recycling experts. I don't see any of them here tonight, but it is nice to hear about the hazmat and solid, I like to say solid materials, but we need to educate, we need more outreach, we need more money put in that. Is it going to cost, what, $25 million to site a landfill and locate it? Something more, I understand it's about $500,000 an acre for a landfill, is that right?
Could be, I don't know exactly.
Yeah, that's what I was told by the manager at the Moortown landfill. So it's crazy, $25 million. Think of the outreach that we could do with that, and then not have to even be sitting here talking about this, all the transport fee, etc. So thank you again for your time, everyone.
Yeah, that's great.
Hi, I'm Carrie Barker from Coventry, and I have 2 things. I really agree with what you were just saying, and also with you, Ms. Jameson, about the state of Vermont, that yes, it's true we create this much trash. Yes, it is true. But I think that here in the Northeast Kingdom, we're kind of getting sick of taking everybody's trash. It's a really great point, but like, why is it the people in this room's job to feel guilty about it? We can change what we're doing because yes, it's but we're bearing the brunt of it, and I'm really tired of it. And the second thing that I want to just say that I feel like Ms. Duggan, you did point out, was that the PFAS levels that they're talking about, the safe PFAS levels, they don't understand PFAS. They don't understand them. This is like lead. It's like everything else. When they first start discovering it's bad, they don't know what's safe. So yes, we do want it to be free of PFAS. And I think that you know that. I'm gonna read something that I read. Michigan is dealing with a lot of PFAS. And this is something that I read from an article on Michigan Live. What is considered a safe PFAS level is largely dependent on where you live, the specific PFAS compound in question, and the scientific research used by the regulatory agencies making the call. So we don't know. That is the bottom line. We don't know how to get it out. We don't know what it is. And we don't know how it's affecting us. All we know is that it's bad. And so I just feel like, just for, you guys probably all do understand that, but I feel like that's something that I just learned, and that I think everybody should understand that there's a safe level, but we don't know what really is safe. So what they deem as safe, it probably isn't. And I guess my question is about Bennington and how, you know, they were meeting protocol, but what happened? What happened there, and how is that going to be prevented from happening in Coventry? So that's my question.
Bennington's very different.
I don't disagree with what was said, although there is a subtle difference. In Bennington, when they permitted the facility back in the 80s and 90s, they did not know anything about this compound. Absolutely correct. So it was allowed to be discharged through pipes in the air, and it spread all over Bennington. But I do think, at least for some of the compounds, the PFOA, we have the lowest health standard in the nation for it. So we are ahead to a certain degree. However, that's one of the perfluorinated compounds, of which there's thousands upon thousands. So I do definitely agree with you that we are just learning. This is the first contaminant I've dealt with that was measured in the parts per trillion. So we are talking a pretty harmful chemical. If just a trace of it, I mean, think of a part per trillion. I can't really even grasp that. It's just one drop in an Olympic-sized pool, I think they say. There's other comparisons that may work better for you. But so in Bennington, we've learned a lot. We still have a lot more to learn, but we're taking these perfluorinateds very, very serious in Vermont. I think we were actually ahead of Michigan, but they really now feel committed beyond any other state, and I think they have now passed us in terms of the amount of testing they're doing and their concern for the people of Vermont. But we do care too. And the route of exposure that's most concerning to PFAS is drinking. So we know that people aren't drinking the groundwater in a groundwater monitoring well right by the landfill. But we also don't want them, the laws don't allow us to let them get away with not dealing with it if it is over the standard. So the one well in the handout that Kathy said you're welcome to take, it is 116 parts per trillion. We are going to make them follow up to ensure it's not going in the river, to ensure, most importantly, it's not going in anyone's drinking water well. But really, great point. And thanks for the question.
I would just add that I think this is why it's so important to do that level of investigation in terms of what is happening with respect to leaking from the landfill and the groundwater monitoring wells, to make sure that we know exactly what's in the groundwater, where it's flowing, and we need to do that before we authorize another 22 years of waste dumping at the site.
Lots more interest in the front. We'll get to you, but a few of the people in the back have been very patient too. Please, the gentleman on this side.
Thank you. I'm Tom Stelter. I'm from Irisburg. I want to push back a little bit about that we're unable to do anything about this. The legislation that closed all our town landfills, it was a great step forward, and everybody that cares about the environment should applaud the effort of everyone that was involved. However, it was never the intention to make one state landfill. We don't need to be the state dump. Now, the way the process worked to close those dumps is there was a number of regulations there was a number of financial incentives and consequences for the towns. And it's the same thing here. The state at any time can provide a number of incentives, a number of consequences for the towns bringing trash up here. And we should do it. I mean, it's just crazy for us to be the state dump. And it's crazy to think that we're powerless and to have state officials. And I want to say, nothing personal, but, you know, you should be helping us to create these regional landfills because it can be done. I mean, they just need incentives down there. They could create a trash hauling tax. They could make all the traffic from Burlington and Bennington go on 91 instead of coming over 14. And I want to say, as a resident of Irisburg, we get 90% of the frickin' traffic. Over 90% of it. It changes the fabric of your community. And we didn't come to Vermont, we weren't born in Vermont to have that kind of hassle. And I want to say, I think the permit that's coming down the road should have regulations that make it so the trash haulers are inconvenienced and the towns bringing trash up here pay a consequence. Now, it may be there's no price too big not to have a landfill in your community. That really may be. Williston and Burlington, they might pay $80 a month for their trash, so they won't have a trash thing. But let them have a consequence. And let some other towns besides Coventry reap all the benefits of this. And I want to say, I'm in no way limiting the question of pollution in the lake or the pollution in the landfills. But this landfill has a lot of consequences besides. Thank you.
The woman has a question back from the back. And did you also have one earlier? I think you know. Okay. Thank you. Here. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Pam Lads, and I live in Newport. The question was partially raised a minute ago. There's a reason that communities like the one that we live in up here have become the garbage dumps of the universe. Other poor communities in other parts of the world are treated in exactly the same way. Areas where the economics of the area are pretty minimal, we become the dumps. And you ask, why is that? It's quite simple. There's a payoff. And the elephant in the room is that the dump pays Coventry and Newport a lot of money for the privilege of treating us as big garbage can. We need to face that. We need to look at the exchange and deal with it because it's not worth it. Do you have any comments?
I have one.
Well, I mean, you're not going to get an argument from me on that, I can tell you. So. One thing is, an individual said we missed the point, and you're probably right to some degree. The point should be that they've got 4 more years there, and if we did all the recycling and stopped bringing trash in from everywhere, God's creation other than our own backyard, that 4 years would probably be good for 20 or 30. So we don't, I can guarantee you one thing, that if they extend this for 22 acres or 22 years, there is going to be no incentive for Chittenden County, Rutland County, Bennington, Brattleboro to have their own recycling plant because they can send it here. The only thing is I wanted to alarm everybody, and I still don't want to miss this point, is that the leachate, Newport can only take so much of it. So now it's going to Montpelier. I mentioned this earlier, I want to re-mention it so people realize this is a statewide problem. It's going into Lake Champlain, more of it's going to go into Lake Champlain, Until they can prove that leachate is something that they'll drink when it comes out of there, which I would love to see, then we don't want to continue expanding it. So it's going into the Dog River, the Winooski River, all the rivers that flow from that into Champlain. So this doesn't affect just the Northeast Kingdom. We probably have the worst of it because we have the air pollution on top of it. But anyways, I just didn't want people to lose track that it's the whole state that's got a problem.
One more question back here, and then you're next in the front. You've been very patient. Oh, you're in line next, okay? I'll put you third, okay? That's great.
Well, the permit lasts for 4 more years. I'm Dave Converse, formerly of Newport and El Derby. So, let's say you don't extend the permit. What's going to happen in 4 years? How long does it take to get another dump situated somewhere else? Are there any answers to that?
Yes.
4 years isn't very long.
There's a woman here who would like to add to that question or
Yes.
comment. Please.
Okay.
Well, you, Mr. The second panelist mentioned, and so Bobby Starr and John Rogers just told me, there is an existing permitted landfill site in Chittenden County, and it's never been developed. So I'm not, I think the most important thing is to cut down on the whole amount of garbage we make. However, even if they deny this new permit, we still have 4 years left on what's there now. It's absolutely ridiculous that they put that thing in the first place on the edge of a lake like that. How could they have ever considered that? And I don't think anybody knows what's in there. They don't test those trucks. You admitted that, all of you. They may test the leachate, but who knows what's in there? The people drive the trucks up. Some are from the big Boston, and they dump it in there. And those, I guess somebody tests the leachate. I understand it's Casella. It's another example, like Pam Latz just said, of dumping on the Northeast Kingdom. It's really outrageous. We have so many things up here that would never be in the Montpelier area. They would just never be, or Stowe, no way. So it's an economic justice issue as much as dirt and garbage.
So is there a plan in 4 years other than the expansion here? Plan B?
Well, why couldn't it be at least to get that other dump going?
Chittenden Solid Waste District acquired a piece of land, but they never engineered.
In the entire state. We had local county dumps before, regional ones. We can do it again. I think some of our legislators and government in the past have really taken advantage of this situation. We're at the point where we need to do something different, and I would suggest requiring. I don't have all the ins and outs of how that would happen, but requiring every county to have a local dump, please. I'm Maureen Fountain, and I live in Derby.
We're going to get all these questions. Let's put the microphone back to somebody in the region who's got a question. One there and one there. There you go.
Okay. I'm Lindy Sargent from Barton, and I'm just going to respond again to what the speaker from Lindenville, Tom Stelter, Kate, and this recent speaker had spoken to. This is a larger issue that we've got, and it really amounts to climate change, too. You have all these trucks coming over, spewing from Massachusetts and other states as well. So this is something that Vermont really does need to deal with. It's not just the solid waste department. It's the agency of environmental resources, natural resources. It's the governor, it's our legislators, it's community responsibility, because we're not going to just all say, you know, as you were able to, John, saying your community tried to get a landfill or get something to deal with responsibly, and they couldn't, because Casella was doing it over here. We can't just allow like a corporate business to come in and control what Vermont is doing.
There was another question.
Well, my name is Mike Deland. I live right in Newport. And I live 2 miles right across from the dump. And my question is, Mr. Schuler, what makes that site the most perfect site for a dump? When you got wetlands, international lake surrounding it, what makes that such a perfect site?
I will try my best to answer that question. I don't know that we would characterize it as the perfect site. It was an existing dump years ago. I think it's referred to as the Nadu landfill. Nadu. I think before that it was like a racetrack or something. So there's always been some activity on that property. What we look at when we permit it, does the plan meet the standards that we have, our rules that are established and set in stone, setbacks, distance to groundwater, things like that. And unfortunately for you all, it has met those standards. So it is allowed under our rules. There's another big rule that we all know, most of us know in this room, and that's called Act 250, which looks at other things beyond our rules. We're focused really on the design and operation and certain setbacks, whereas we know Act 250 looks at traffic, aesthetics, other things that aren't in our rules. So we couldn't say to Casella, you can't do it because of, but Act 250 can. So that is another avenue for you all to share your concerns and information. So we wouldn't say it's the perfect site, but it is one that Casella came to us with an application and they met the standards and we approved the permit. And they've come in for a number of extensions, which we've had similar public processes, but not this level of concern. So we really thank you all for sharing this. We hadn't heard this before, so this is pretty valuable. But they met our standards. So we really had nothing that...
I think it's finally come to pass. I mean, it's just, you just push the limit just on, it's just not going to be safe. I mean, it's like Murphy's Law. If it's going to go wrong, it will go. And this is what's going to happen. We're just pushing the limit. Just like a fun site.
Okay. Well, thank you for that.
Are there other questions? Let's bring the microphone forward. Here's one right in the aisle here. Please.
I'm Effie Brown. I live in Derby. I have lived in Derby most all of my life. I've lived 3 different locations around the lake here. And my question is for Chuck. I think I heard you say, Chuck, the Chittenden site was concerned because they didn't think they'd have volume enough. It sounds to me like it might be a good location.
No, so it wasn't necessarily that they wouldn't have the volume. Certainly, you know better than anyone that Chittenden County produces a lot of waste. The key was, so the solid waste district would have been the ones to invest $25 million of taxpayers' money of Chittenden County into developing that. To pay that back, they would need to get the garbage. And the courts ruled that Chittenden couldn't put an ordinance that said any waste generated in Chittenden County had to stay in Chittenden. It was called flow control. I was on the board when that decision was raised. And here we had been spending millions trying to site a landfill. And we finally got a property. They took it by eminent domain, which also cost them millions. And then we learned we couldn't force the garbage to stay in Chittenden. So again, Casella was the biggest hauler collecting garbage in Chittenden. They had the landfill. There was the board was concerned, we'll build a landfill and no one will come, right? It'll all go up to you guys, and that's why you're here, because you're sick and tired of it. But the reality is we, Kathy and I, don't control that. The flow control decision was terrible in my mind, but I think it went all the way to the Supreme Court. So
U.S. Supreme Court.
U.S. Supreme Court. So it was international commerce. So I mean, it was an issue beyond us. So again, to get back to the idea of a landfill in every county, a lot has to be done by the Vermont legislature to make that happen. Not only financial, but law changes. And I wouldn't be the first one to begin to tell you how to make that work. It's not easy, but it's a great comment.
If Chittenden County wants our trash, we'd be glad to haul it back.
Very good point. Unfortunately, Casella is probably your hauler. So.
Hi, I'm Randy Cottonor from Derby, Vermont. My question is, first of all, I firsthand seen what's going into the landfill, and there is going to be some problems in the future. And my question is, what is the life expectancy of the liners? And who's responsible once they start failing? And what plan is there when this happens?
Can I respond to that? I'm going to make a comment because I asked the same question that Rainey asked 30 years ago when I was mayor, when the solid waste district was being formed and Casella's lined landfill was only a thought. They hadn't done it yet. And when I asked back then what the life expectancy of a lined landfill was, they told me 20 years. That was 30 some odd years ago. Now, I'm not sure that's exactly what it is, but I will tell you from the EPA stuff that I read, they say 10, 20, or eventually that it will leak. And I'm guessing that when it leaks, it's not effective anymore.
Yeah, I can add to that. Yeah. I do roofing. I did roofing for construction and at the end of that time, homeowners usually have a plan in place if they're going to replace their roof. So I guess we're looking at the same situation.
So, line landfill's been around for about 30 years now. The testing that has been done is, in addition to looking at those facilities that were created 30 years ago, is looking at laboratory tests of these liners and simulations of, like when you want to try to demonstrate that something is durable, and they stretch it to kind of like the extremes. And so those laboratory tests demonstrate that it can persist perhaps hundreds of years. We don't know the exact numbers. That is why we have testing going on routinely every year, twice a year, in groundwater wells in and around the landfill, so that we will, and also between the layers of the landfill and the underdrain of the landfill, because we want to be sure we get quick knowledge of any potential leak that is occurring, so that corrective action can be taken.
So just to add to that,
is there liability insurance if somebody?
Casella's required to have a post-closure fund that we make sure they have an adequate amount. When they are done and they close it and put a plastic liner over the top and fill and seed it and grass it and they're done, they're required just at a minimum to monitor for 30 years. And that doesn't mean 30 years they're done. If after 30 years there's still issues, and we're seeing that now in unlined landfills where municipalities are saying, hey, we're done our 30 years, can we stop? And it's like, yes, because this one's clean, no issues. No, you're still having a problem. So they're required, Casella will be required in perpetuity until they can prove that the landfill, when it's closed and capped, that there's no other issues.
Or they go bankrupt.
They have that fund as a bond.
Yeah, but they have a closure fund. So that protects the state from inheriting that liability.
So
Assuming, yes.
Just in terms of housekeeping, after Jen comments, there are a couple of folks who've been waiting patiently in front with questions. 1, 2 more questions, 3 more questions, and then we're going to round off, okay? I know we could go on longer. It's been such a good discussion. 4 more questions? No, first Jen, and then just John.
I will just make it quick. I just want to echo that the waste that's disposed of in these lined landfill cells, we know that it contains some really dangerous stuff. We've talked about what is in leachate. And that waste is a threat for decades and decades and decades. And the liners will not last that long. So ultimately, liners may delay contamination, but it's not going to prevent it. We can't be sure that it's going to prevent it. And so, 2 points. I think one, here, we've got questions about whether or not there is contamination down gradient of the lined cells. We need to do a thorough investigation and answer that question once and for all before we permit additional waste disposal. And 2, the only safe way to deal with waste is to not generate it in the first place. And so it is really important that we focus on waste reduction and recycling as the long-term plan and the long-term solution.
Monitoring the waste, some type of monitor between the people disposing of it and the people taking care of it.
Agreed. Yeah,
because
absolutely.
The trash haulers do not have time for that.
Absolutely.
Well, my name is Chris Riley, I live in Coventry, and I guess my comment is still a little bit more self-serving, but that's the way it's going to be. And you don't have to respond because there is no answer. My parents bought my property, or the property we live on, 30 years ago, when there was just a small landfill owned by Charlie Nato. Now it's a monstrous landfill. We were sold the property, or my parents were sold the property, with the premise that we had $1 million view. That $1 million view, which included a view of South Bay, is gone forever. Now it's just a grassy knoll. And that's terrible. I mean, who wants to get up at early in the morning, walk on your deck, and have to look at trash? And the smell coming from there is terrible. Early in the morning when things are still, I can hear the landfill. 5:30, 6 o'clock when my windows are open in the summertime, I hear bang, bang, bang. And you can hear a grinding noise. I'm not sure where it's coming from, but it's obviously coming from the landfill. And I've been to Act 250. I've been to Act 250 for years. And I feel that it falls on deaf ears. They look at you, they nod their head, and they get the permit anyway. My parents have been fighting this for years. Yes. They've been fighting it probably since the late 90s, and it just falls on deaf ears.
We'll take it over here. Do you solve the question? Yeah.
So, Sam Young from Glover, State Representative, and I want to give these guys, you should know that, they're just implementing the laws that are on the books, and so they're responding to what is the current situation, and, there is the potential to change it. It's going to be difficult. I was curious about the kind of, what did you say, the flow control. And so that was something that Chittenden County tried to do through ordinance. But even if it was a state law, if it's been decided by the U.S. Supreme Court, there couldn't be, even if we passed the law, we couldn't really control the flow of trash. That's what I'm taking that as. Yeah. And then just kind of, for the process going forward, you can issue a permit for up to 10 years. So it wouldn't necessarily be the full 51 acres. It would maybe be a portion of that. And then also I'm just interested in the timeline of Act 250 if you do issue that permit. Thank you.
It is a 10-year permit. They have presented the design for the entire expansion. but it only gets built in cells, so they would only be able to, build and manage the cells that they can manage in that 10-year period.
Up to 10 years.
Up to 10 years, excuse me. And Act 250, that's a great question. I don't know the time period for the Act 250 permit that they've requested.
I think they are waiting for us first. If we were to issue it, then they would go next. And then if we were not to issue it, then there would not be an Act 250 hearing, I believe.
Okay, because we really will stop in the next few minutes because we want to have a little chance to sum up while most people are still here. Let's take the 3 questions that we identified before and give those people a chance to ask us. Then we'll round off.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Lynn Batchelor from Derby Line. I'm also a state rep. I'm really upset, but let me ask a question. Did I hear you right that our garbage juice is really not being cared for properly by being sent to Newport Waste? I mean, is that something that, should we be looking to make a new type of wastewater management for that type of garbage juice?
Right.
I think that's a question that many people are raising here today. I think that that is going to be looked at carefully by the wastewater program when they are looking at the application that's pending for the leachate management from the landfill. And just to be clear, the landfill permit that we've been talking about, the expansion permit, is for the facility on the site. The leachate is managed under a different permit that's under a different application. And so I think that's a good question. It's going to be examined by the agency as far as what needs to be tested for in the leachate and also at the wastewater treatment plant that's receiving the leachate into the discharging waters.
Kathy, can you give a status on when they might issue a draft permit, and then also how folks can be put on an interested parties list for that permit?
So no, I can't give you an exact time frame. I do know we had a meeting on it just today to talk about it, so it is in the forefront of the folks' minds, right to our commissioner's office. And if it were to be moving forward, it would follow the same public process that ours. So a draft permit would be out for public comment, and they would hold hearings like we did prior to this that most of you all didn't get the invite because you didn't show, so we're glad you came today.
So we had 2 more questions. 1, 2, we have 3 more questions. And then that's so
I see where this is going.
Right back here. There we go. Thank you so much.
Anita Ansel, Newport. I'd like to end the conversation of expansion and start the conversation of closing this landfill, which isn't just for Vermont, it sounds like it's for New England. 4 years, that's too long for me. I think we ought to really be talking about what's reasonable. It's been reported in the news media that Casella has put aside $1 million to cap that landfill. It doesn't sound like a lot. And I wonder about a fund for any expenses for anything that does happen that needs to be cleaned up, because that will be expensive. And I think that's a reasonable thing to expect them to do, is to have some money set aside for those purposes. It's been talked about that recycling could be part of the solution. I think that this landfill has shown that waste and water quality is a state problem. And I think the state needs to come to the forefront in this because it's not being managed. The ANR saying that they have no say in where a dump is located seems crazy to me, because my understanding is they can prevent a building being constructed in wetlands. So why can they not have a say with a dump being located surrounded by wetlands? That makes no sense. Your oversight needs to be reviewed and perhaps changed so that you have more of a say in some of these things. Recycling. Recycling isn't enough. We need to look at what manufacturers are putting out there. The packaging, the one-time plastics, products that are built to last a very short lifetime. I would like to see a more holistic approach. We tend to get very narrow-sighted on some of these things. I just wanted to say that I had a local hauler tell me this was several years ago, that his trucks got up to the dump and they were not allowed to dump that day because there was so much trash that came from out of state and from outside the area. So it can only take so much per day, and they cut off by the time he got there. So we weren't even serving our local haulers that day. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question back here. Oh, I'm sorry. No, you've got it. Sorry.
My name is Christy Farah, and I live in Newport. And I just want to say that I'm really dumbfounded by the fact that Casella gets to do the testing, and that I have to trust Casella with my children and their children with the testing pieces. That's something Vermont or should be responsible of. You know, they have a lot of money, and look at all the lawsuits that they have already against them. And you know, where is that going? How does that prove to you that they do meet the standards and everything that is necessary? To me, that shows that they don't. But yet you guys say that they are. I just can't. I am really baffled by that piece.
Thank you. And let's take your question. Mike, over here. Or is there another question? Right to the back. Thank you. Okay.
You did answer my question 3 or 4 questions ago, but I need to say a few words. My name is Guy Madra, and I'm a candidate in for an M&A position. Oh, it's okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So I'm a candidate for an M&A position in the upcoming election in the province of Quebec on October 1st. About 35 persons from Quebec are in this room tonight, and you represent a lot of people living in the Eastern Townships. In the first day of my campaign, I told in a press conference, which Mr. Benoit attended, that drinking water problem would be one of my priorities for the next 4 years.
Excuse me, we can't
hear a word you're saying.
Sorry.
Back away. Back away.
Farther down, maybe?
This one?
Better.
I'm sorry. A lot of interesting things have been said tonight, and I don't regret my statement. So I'll work the next year to help. I know that we're in Quebec. We have limited things we can do, but we'll help and try to get the water in Quebec safe. Thank you very much.
Our last comment in the corner. Right back there. Thank you.
Tina Brazzo from, Newport Center. A few things. First, with all this talk about Vermonters being put to the test to recycle and try and minimize the amount of input that they're creating for the dump. Nothing is being said about the fact that whatever the out-of-staters are not being put under any kind of pressure themselves, and why does this create a balance, an imbalance? If we lower what we put in as Casella, which is a business, they're running based on the number of trucks that come in, and it sounds like they do it on a regular fixed basis. They're going to make money one way or another. So if we decrease our input, it's our land. How will does that enable them to take in more out of state in order to meet the rate that they need to profit? And with 4 years left, why is any out of state garbage being allowed to come into the state? we might be able to maximize the use of the landfill by allowing only the garbage from Vermont to be put in there in the remaining time possible.
Thank you. Thanks everyone. Just a couple of things we're going to round up here, but first, a brief announcement before I make my.
Yeah, I quit. We're going to pass the hat for Dump, which is our committee. If you want us to continue working on this, there are expenses. We rented the hall tonight. We have extended rooms to some of our guests to be here, so it wasn't their expense to always be here. I don't think we're paying for the state, but you know.
Of course we are.
Well, we are in one way or another. But, so I just thought I'd let you know, we're going to pass the hat. We intend to continue this fight. It's going to cost us some money, so we'd appreciate whatever you can help us with. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to just say I thought it was a really exciting evening. The panel was extremely informative. The questions were pointed, and I learned a lot. I'm sure a lot of us here did too. And one of the things I was asked to do was just to think about some of the broad topics that came up. This is not to imply that there was a consensus on the panel and the audience, but just some questions that came up over and over again that clearly would repay further thinking and on which people would like to do some work. So let me tell you, in my scrawl here, some of the main things I've heard being reiterated as points of interest, and then I'll pause to see who'd like to add what to the list, and then the dump group can think about what comes next. So one of the issues that was very interesting, I think to many people, is that in fact most of what goes into the landfill could have been composted, or could have been prevented by having different regulations on packaging, and that one of the things that, I don't think this was a controversial point, that it would be desirable to think about reducing the waste stream. And one early comment was that this might be a place for educational outreach, a week-long recycling camp for educators, legislation governing packaging. These are some things, that's one thing that seems to be an important factor to think about. Another one that several people mentioned was all of the points that got raised and many of the comments speak to necessity in this important area for long-range thinking, long-range planning. Mr. Benoit mentioned that finally the politicians, not our managers, are going to have to come to the fore and change things, and that political pressure is one of the things that can play out there. In relation to long-term planning, there were several points, I'll just mention them in a kind of popcorn fashion that related to that. One was that perhaps we need to think about state land. Another one was that we need to think about explicit cost-benefit standards in terms of such major systems. So those are two things: the need to reduce the waste stream before it gets to the landfill, and also the desirability of long-range planning. Then there were some others that were very interesting to bring in. There was a lot of talk about slowing down and again, I'm not saying we have a consensus on this. These are just things that we're talking about. Slowing down permitting processes in such areas as we get more and more adept at our testing of groundwater, the PFAS, as we think about systematic issues. And in terms of the broader environmental issue, that this is one of the big issues of an overconsumptive society. Nobody said that, but that's what I was thinking, where we consume and throw away so much.
Speak into your
where we consume and throw away so much. Even throw away microphones. But that we might want to think within a broad context. An interesting point was all that truck traffic is in conflict with Vermont's stated interests in abating climate change. So these are all things that might be thought about. Another point that several people made very forcefully was that it looks as if the Northeast Kingdom, it feels to many people who live here, as if it had been designated as a big garbage can. Another phrase was, it's crazy for us to be the state dump. There's a lot of strong feeling about this. The question is, how does this need for the state get shared more broadly? So that's an issue that people will want to talk about some more. And the other broad issue that I heard a lot about, and there's not, again, this is not one where we have consensus, but is the question of whether there's some kind of possibility of a designation of Lake Memphremagog as a drinking water source. And I did hear what was said about that. So is Lake Champlain, and this is not necessarily in conflict with wastewater treatment, but perhaps there's a symbolic or political way to acknowledge this as an area of concern. So those are some things I thought about, and then I know that the dump group, whose hat is currently passing, or maybe they've had to empty it and refill it by now, the dump group is asking how to, this was meant to be a broad public conversation, and I think I really congratulate people on how vigorous and respectful and pointed it was. But the question is, what comes next? What sorts of formats will allow people to work moving forward on strategies dealing with the political side of things, dialogue with the state agencies about ways in which they feel their hands might be tied, that certain things could be changed there. So that's a broad question for the group here in Newport. What would be the next steps to allow for constructive, ongoing dialogue that has an outcome? So those are some broad topics I heard, listening to you and scratching along with my notes. Are there any equally broad topics that people would like to put on the list for the dump group to think about moving forward?
Over here.
Please, yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to put economic justice on that list because, you know, really we are, again, as Pamela has pointed out, we are a very poor section of the state, and we seem to be getting, anyway, so economic justice.
Yeah, and since I've got the mic, I'll just repeat that, wanting to have economic justice added as a topic, and which goes along with the question of the burden borne by the Northeast Kingdom, a fairly unpopulous and not as rich a region as some, please.
This isn't another broad topic, but I'm wondering, is it appropriate for ANR, by way of next steps, for ANR to provide information to dump about the 250 timeline so that they can get information out to all of us about participating in those discussions in the same way we participated here?
I would encourage you to connect with Act 250 directly. A lot of people think Act 250 is part of ANR. It's not. It's a different agency. So we don't have any
But you're meeting with them.
And
we can certainly try. We can reach out to them.
We can let them know that there's a large group of interested people in this process, but we can't direct them on how to conduct themselves.
And by the way, I'll remind folks that there is a stack of some documents about at least samplings here. Other broad topics to bring into the conversation as people go forward. Please, I see two. Please.
Two questions, possibly just two. One is, when we put our email on the list over here, what will become of that? Who is maintaining the attendance list? That's the first one.
We'll add you to our mailing list, and hopefully we'll have an update periodically. It has been once a week, but if other people will join in, we can continue that.
This is dumb.
We will continue to hear. Also, I was told there's a Facebook website. How is it listed? How do you find that Facebook website? Could someone answer?
Dump. Don't undermine Memphremagog's purity.
Type in dump. Don't undermine Memphremagog's purity. And there's a website. Put your thoughts and concerns on that website, please.
Please, yeah.
The second one is, if there's anyone here from the city of Newport, I feel it might not be necessary for them to charge for the hall rental tonight. I feel that this is more of a public forum, and that maybe the city of Newport should consider waiving the fees for tonight's meeting.
The city of Newport does own this facility. It's contracted to a leaseor. We were charged actually a half price for it. So thank you for your support, and we will put the rest in the bank and hopefully incorporate, so I don't want to touch this one.
Just a couple more thoughts about points for ongoing.
The international nature of the problems is essential to address in our broad solution.
So another point that should go on our list, and I'll have this all written down, is we should emphasize the international nature of this process and the international nature of this dialogue. Please.
Forgive me if this is obvious or has been stated and I haven't heard it, but it seems like we're all cooperating in agreement about managing something as important as garbage and trash. It's like managing water or managing air, and letting it be managed by private enterprise rather than by public entities. I see that as a huge issue.
So the private-public question of responsibility and oversight, which goes along, I think, also with the issue of the need for long-term planning on a state basis. I think, let's take one more comment, and then I think we really could take two more comments. Then we're going to really stop. Please.
For the list, I think should be added the information that she gave us at the beginning, saying that any permit should be delayed until we have full investigation of what's going on this site and any analysis of any capacity. What you gave us as information at this beginning.
Great. Thank you. Got that one. And one last point. Yes.
One thing is advances in technology. We're talking about a technology that is old, it's failed, but there are new technologies in waste management that haven't been discussed, and that it doesn't seem like it's being forced upon the Costellas of the world to have to look into them. There are other countries who are solving these problems very effectively, and waste-to-energy programs are viable, and we should look into it.
So new technologies being used successfully elsewhere is another one that will be on their agenda. Thank you all very much for coming for such a productive conversation. Thank you all.